In this video, I'm going to review how the manual checks function can help you figure out what the tax withholding should be for an employee. So let's start with the payroll module in the file maintenance where you define what an employee's tax status is. For this example, I'm going to pick a hourly employee. So we'll use Maria, and I'm going to go down to, well, I'll take a look at the standard scheduled deductions to show you what's going on there, and also the tax information. So I'll click OK. I show you the tax information because I want to point out that this employee has medical insurance and dental insurance and a couple of other deductions, but these two deductions are pre-tax deductions. So that's going to affect her taxable wages for federal income tax purposes. If she had a retirement plan, that would also factor in and reduce her taxable wages. So she has a total of $120 in pre-tax deductions. I'm going to go to the next page, and here I'm going to page down or click OK to get to this federal line. Now on this line, I have her, I hit the enter key to edit, and here she's set as single 2 and extra withholding of 0, and that's where you could put in, if they have filed on their new W-4 some extra withholding, that's where you could put that in. So if they say take an extra $20 a check or $10 a check, you could put that in there. The fixed withholding, you should rarely, if ever, I don't know that I've ever seen anyone use that. A business owner might use that. Someone who does estimated taxes might do that, but it's not common for an employee relationship to do that. The EIC code is not used, and generally if their status is single, then you'd use the FedS table. Now, the important thing here then is that you can manipulate these exemptions. Now I've worked through this example, so I happen to know that this is the right answer that's going to give me what I want, but if you don't, you won't know that necessarily. So just so you realize, this is the screen where if you have to try a couple of different trials, you would come back here and you would manipulate what this exemption amount is. If you want to decrease the tax, you would increase the exemptions. Okay, but so that's where the tax information is stored, and I'm going to go to the next page. That gets me back out. So I've checked what the employee is, and just to save time, it happens to be the settings. I wouldn't know that ahead of time normally, but it is the right settings. We'll see in a minute. So now that I've seen the employee, I can go to the payday work menu. Now, this process should only be done in what I call a quiet time in the pay cycle. In other words, you've posted checks, there's no checks on file, there's no reason to have any data in the daily work, although it would not matter really. As long as you come into the manual checks function and it says, and it prompts you for the group code, then you know that confirms there's no checks on file. If it says something like, warning, checks are already on file, well, you're not in what I call a quiet period. You've got checks on file, and if that's a surprise to you, you should print the check register and see what it's talking about. So in this company sample data, the group is 1, and I'm going to use this sample data goes back and uses a dummy year of 2010. So I'm going to go with that just for illustration purposes. Now, if I wanted to turn off the miscellaneous deductions, remember the PD code of 6 is a magic number. I'm going to leave that here. When you put these dates in, it doesn't matter what you put here. You have to put in dates within what is your current quarter. Just be aware that it will affect the defaults the next time you do a calculate, because if you manipulate these dates, it will change the defaults the next time. But that's okay. You just correct them and put in the correct dates in every case. So just don't let that throw you off, in addition to the PD code and so forth. So those dates can be any dates in the quarter. It probably makes sense to use maybe what the next pay period dates are going to be, just for illustration purposes. So I'm going to use PD code 1. That's important because that is going to use it's going to take out the deductions when I do a manual check, and that's important to get the right taxable pay. So I fill that out, and now I pick my employee that I need to, and this would be your new employee. I'm going to use Maria here. And I'm just going to click OK to the header. I don't need to put anything in there. And then I get down to where I can put in the earnings. And again, for an hourly person, use, pick the number of hours and the pay rate that they're normally going to be. In other words, the first pay cycle, they might only work for 5 hours or partial 1 day or something. So don't use that as their test. Use what would be a typical paycheck. So I'm going to append here, and I'm going to for this purpose, I'm going to skip down to the amount, and that's usually the best thing to do, or you could put in the hours if you want. But the point is to get to the gross pay that you want to test. So I'm going to use $2,000 as my test amount for this employee. So here on the first screen, I've appended and I've put in their wages. Now, it's important to press the calculate on this screen. So I'm going to click the calculate. Since this is set up for accrual, it prompts me this. You might not get this question if your system is not doing accrual of benefits. So I'm going to say no to the accrual. And then I'm going to press next page. Here I could manipulate these if I wanted to. It's not a bad idea in either case to click the recalculate. You'll just get a flicker of the screen. Then I go to the next page, and here it shows me what my taxes are. If I have version 7.6 of the payroll system, I also have this column of taxable wages. And notice how the federal wage is different from the Social Security wage. In this case, I was setting this example up, and actually these would be the same. These should be reduced as well by those pre-tax deductions. I just didn't. I neglected to configure that, but I was concentrating on the federal wage. But in any case, we have the taxable wages reflected here, and this is the wage that starts your whole process, knowing what that taxable wage is for a pay period. And notice the tax here calculates now with a single 2 setting. It calculates to have a tax of $161.70. So that's what I'm looking at. So now I can press next check, and I'm back to its prompting me for the next employee. Now, you might have another employee. You might have more than one employee that you want to test at the same time. By all means, go ahead and set that employee up. Now, if I find, now at this point, you probably, I guess I could have mentioned up top that you could have already looked up, if you know what the person's taxable wage is, you could use the IRS publication 15T, as I outlined in my procedure, using the page 7 outline of how you use the wage bracket method. And this employee is not, when they filled out the W-4, does not have any special things, special additions or special deductions. They're just simply, in this case, single and claiming a standard deduction. And so if you look in the table, you would find that the tax is in fact $161. So that calculation in fact confirmed that it was right. But let's say that it was wrong. What would I do about it? I would go back to the file maintenance employees, and I would call up that employee, and I would just come down to the tax information, and just for illustration purposes, I'm going to change this, and I'm going to make it single 3. I'm going to increase it 1 more. So that's what you could do. You could come in here and change that up or down depending on what you want to see happen. And then I'm going to go next. So I've changed the tax information now. I can now go back to my payday work and manual checks. And look what happens now. If there's checks on file, I now get a choice. What do I want to do now? Because there's already checks on file. I want to change a manual check. So I choose that option and I pull the employee that I want to change the manual check, and I use the inquiry F2 or click the spyglass to see what the sequence number is. That would be, was it the first one you did, the second one? You know, you likely would know what that number is, but you may as well look it up. So then I come down here to the earnings, and I see my $2,000 there. And once again, very important, I click the calculate, and I still get my question. I say, no, I don't want to accrue the benefits. I go next page. I see my deductions, and I recalculate. I flicker the screen. Then I go next page. And here I see my taxes have been reduced. And as my outline mentioned, it's going to be around $20 or so. I increased her exemption by one, and it decreased her tax a little bit. So that's how you can use going back and forth and manipulate it so that you get the tax withholding that you know the table, the new table using the new method says that you want to get. Now, incidentally, I will point out that using the 2019 W-4, this employee would correctly be calculated at $183. So just by filing a new W-4, this employee saves over $20 a paycheck in federal taxes. You may want to, as a little tip to my friends out there, you may want to put in your own new W-4, because I can tell you now that for most employees, almost I think all, they're going to have what could be a significant decrease in their tax withholding if they file a new W-4. That could cause some work for you if everybody charged the office and said, give me a new form. But it's kind of goofy what the government has done, I have to say. In my years, 40 years of doing this, I've never seen the government do something what they did this year in terms of having two forms still out there and two ways of doing it. It's kind of surprising. So in any event, that's how you can manipulate the tax. So I go next check, I'm back, and I can do it. Now, once I have cycled back, I could go back to file maintenance and so forth. But once I get the calculation and I confirm that the calculation is what I want, if I come back to payday work and I come back to manual checks, one of my options is to start over. So if I click start over and click OK, I can tell that it reacted because now it's prompting me for a group code. That confirms that the system just erased all the trials and tests you were just doing. So it has no effect on the payroll system. So in other words, if I come in to manual checks and I pretend or put in a check and I do a test and I do whatever I want, if I come back in and I say start over, it's going to wipe that out and it has no effect on the payroll system. So that's why you can run this process at any time as a test when you're in a quiet period with no checks on file and it doesn't hurt anything. Again, if you want to confirm that you don't have any checks on file, for example, if you come to the edit register says, oh, yeah, the check file's empty, so I can't do an edit register. So that confirms. So make sure you do that. Again, the gotcha is when people come to the calculate checks function and they come into this screen and it says, warning, checks are on file, do you want to start over? You should never say yes to that unless you know exactly what is happening, like you just did a calculate and you want to redo it. I get calls frequently where people just say, oh, well, yeah, I want to start over. And they're not really thinking about, well, that's kind of confusing. If you get that, why not do an edit register? if it says checks are on file and you're not sure, do an edit register and see what they are. You might discover you have all the checks from last pay period still there. So that